Welcome to our viewers. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. Wait, there's a smarter way. Know your data and move your data with Komprise and Cloudian. Joining us today are Krishna, COO at Komprise, and Jon, CMO at Cloudian. Welcome, Krishna and Jon. With that, I will hand it over to Jon.
All right. Hey, thank you very much, Jen. And thank you all for joining us today. I think we've got a really exciting topic, which is, handling data growth in this era of, exploding data volumes. We're going to talk a little bit about the data growth challenge, which I think we all know and live every day. And then we're going to talk through 5 simple tips for how you can manage data smarter and really control and manage data growth. And then we're going to go through a little demo and solution architecture for a joint solution of Komprise and Cloudian and how we can work together to make it simpler and easier for you to manage data and cut costs at the same time. And then finally do a summary and to get to your questions at the end. So I think, we all know and live the data growth challenge every day, which is, the expanding volume of data is simply overwhelming. If you're involved in anything that involves data collection, whether it be through video means, through sensors, through big data, machine data, many people are probably familiar with Splunk archives, and the amount of data that can be acquired through that means can easily get into the petabytes very quickly. And not only are we collecting more data, but we're simply keeping it longer and also having to access it more frequently. So those 3 things combined, more data, longer retention periods, and more frequent access, really speak to the need for a different paradigm for how we manage data. The old days of being able to collect data and then shuffle it off to a tape library, never to be seen or heard from again, are really past. So I think we need to be moving into a new era where we manage things in a better and smarter way. And really the use cases for this span all industries. So no one is exempt from the data challenge of how we manage information. Some of the cases are very obvious. Look at bio and life sciences with genomic information and the amount of data collected in a single genome sequencing scan. It's just phenomenal. And that same kind of issue really resounds across all industries, from payment processing to healthcare to media and entertainment. And everyone is now facing these challenges. So the question is, how do we do a better and simpler job of doing this? Because the old-fashioned way of simply adding more just doesn't scale. It was okay when you had a few hundred gigabytes or even a few hundred terabytes of data, but when you're starting to talk about things in the petabyte scale, the traditional file structure or block data structures just don't work anymore. And the reason is they were not designed for capacities that really exceed a large number of terabytes or even a very small number of petabytes. When you start talking as the management workload rapidly expands, your ability to intelligently manage costs essentially goes away, and your ability to find and access information also suffers because that information becomes spread across multiple silos. So not only are you racking up more space costs, more equipment costs, you're also limiting your ability to get value from that information. And that's ultimately where IT's real strategic value to the organization lies, is in making better use of the information you have and really deriving decision-making ability from that information. And that just goes away if that information is spread across a multiplicity of silos. So the third thing that's adding complexity here is cloud, because as we move towards ways of solving the volume problem, which is, you've got more data to manage, maybe cloud can be an effective tool to help. Reality is that adds another layer of complexity because now you've got another storage infrastructure to manage. And we're seeing that already. A very high percentage of organizations are moving to hybrid cloud and multi-cloud deployments. And the first thing they find is that cloud is just another IT resource, just like having another data storage device in your data center. Cloud is another IT resource. So the question is, with this growing multiplicity of stuff, more devices in your data center, more resources in the cloud, how do you intelligently make use of your information? How do you intelligently store it? How do you manage it? And how do you do all that while controlling costs? Everyone knows your budgets are not increasing anywhere near at the rate that data is scaling. Certainly your head count is not increasing at that rate. So what really is called for is a better way, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So with that, I will introduce it, Krishna, CEO of Komprise, who will talk through 5 tips and give us a demo of a solution. So Krishna?
Perfect. Thanks, John. As John mentioned, data growth is overwhelming our IT infrastructure. It's becoming really challenging today, not only because you're storing all this petabytes of data, but also because quite often businesses are actively managing all data equally. And what I mean by that is, users continue to add data, applications are adding data onto your storage. IT often doesn't know what data is important and what's not. IT doesn't often know what data is hot and what data is really stale and cold and hasn't been touched in a long time. And so all data ends up being stored on expensive storage and then backed up multiple times and, having a DR copy. So the cost of keeping all these copies of the data can get prohibitively expensive, especially when you consider that 76% of data, on average, across industries, has not been touched in a year or more. So 76% of the data in most organizations is cold and hasn't been accessed or changed in a year or more. And this is data we have collected across our customers. So today, Komprise manages, over 300 petabytes of data across, 150 plus enterprise customers. And across these customers, you can see the breakdown by industry on how much cold data the customers typically have and what their growth rate looks like. So as you can see, cold data is accumulating rapidly, and as data grows, more data is aging every day. And so the key to a smarter way to manage your data is to manage hot and cold data differently. So the 5 tips that John and I are going to talk about today are really around a smarter way to manage data based on the criticality and based on the data you have. So the first thing we would say is understand your data. And I know this is tough because IT doesn't often create the data. IT doesn't use the data that it's being asked to manage. So how do you visualize, what data is actually being used and what data is inactive or cold? So we'll talk through that. We'll show you how you can very easily figure out hot and cold data in your own organization. But it all starts with understanding your data first. Second, once you understand your data, classify the data. Know what's hot, know what's cold, know what's users, etc. And after that, figure out your budget. Understand, what your limits are. Is your budget growing corresponding to your data growth? In most environments, data is growing at 20% plus year over year, but budgets are staying flat. Then, know your different options. We'll talk through the options that, we provide with Cloudian and Komprise. And the last thing we would say is, as you evolve, you might, things might change. You might change your backup strategy tomorrow. There may be more data showing up. So how do you pick a strategy that can evolve with you? So these are the 5 tips that we have. And now we're going to dive into greater detail on each of these tips. And instead of giving you a lot of PowerPoint, we're actually going to dive into details with a demo. Before we do the demo, let's very quickly show you the solution architecture. Essentially, what we're showing you here is a better way to manage your data where you still have data sitting on your primary storage, and your primary storage probably is network-attached storage today. So it might be NetApp, it might be EMC Isilon, it might be Windows file servers, it might be new flash offerings like Pure Flash Blades or NetApp All Flash Arrays, etc. It really doesn't matter. So you want your hot data on highly performing network attached storage. But then you can have a solution that gives you analytics on your data and moves cold data transparently into a cost-efficient object store like Cloudian. And that solution in the middle is what Komprise is. And even though we're showing you Komprise running on boxes here, Komprise actually is just software. It just runs as virtual machines on your current infrastructure. So there's nothing new you need to buy other than just the Komprise software to use it. It just runs as VMs, and it's a scale-out architecture. But we're going to show you how you can use Komprise to get analytics on your data, to identify hot and cold data, and to transparently archive cold data into Cloudian Object Store. And then we'll talk about Cloudian Object Store itself and its merits and how it can help you offset costs. And in total, with this solution, we'll show you how you can take all that cold data, that 70% plus of your data that really hasn't been touched in a while, and remove it not only from your expensive storage, but also remove it from your backups and your DR, so that you can shrink all those costs significantly. On average, we save 70% or more of costs for our customers with Cloudian and Komprise, and we'll show you how. Okay? So now that you understand that architecture, I'm going to switch and show you an actual demo. And in the demo, I'm going to talk through the first 3 tips on smarter data management. How do you understand your data? How do you figure out what data is important? And how do you fit your data management strategy to your budget constraints? Those are the 3 points I'm going to talk about. So I'm switching now to the screen. And what I'm showing you here is actually the Komprise product. So let's say you want to do an assessment in your own environment. Let's say you want to understand your data better. All you would do is contact us, and you would be given Komprise virtual machines, which we call the Komprise observers, and you just need one to get started. You bring it up, and once you bring it up, you come into this management screen. And in here, we're actually going to just connect Komprise to any of your network attached storage that you want to analyze. So we would, in this example, we're connecting Komprise to some NetApp 7 mode filers, some EMC Isilon filers, some NetApp cluster mode filers, and some Windows servers. So you literally just point Komprise at any storage you have that has NFS or SMB access. And once you connect it to the storage, you start getting the analytics on the data. The first thing you see is how much data do you really have. So in this example, the customer has 195 terabytes of data. And of that 195 terabytes, it's actually classifying for you how much data has been actively used and how much data has not been used and in how long. So here you can see that a good amount of the data, about 16% of the data hasn't been touched in over 3 years. And it's about 4 million files, so it's a significant amount of data. And another equal amount hasn't been touched in over 2 years, and about 31% hasn't been touched in over a year or more, and then there is some more active data. So you can actually get a profile of your data so you understand how much data is hot, how much data is cold. You can also get different statistics on this, like how fast is this data growing. Sorry, pressed the wrong button on the screen. How fast the data is growing. And if you did nothing, how much more storage you would need to buy. And different analytics on the data, like who's actually using the data, what kinds of files are they, etc. Is it big files or small files? Which departments, which users use the data? All kinds of information that help you understand which data is really critical and needs to be on active management, and which data is cold and less critical and can be managed more passively with something like an object store. So once you understand that, you can start actually setting policies. And as you set these policies, Komprise will project for you how much you can save. So for example, let's say that in our remote offices, anything over over a year old, we want to move to a bucket on Cloudian. So once I set that policy, Komprise actually shows me that 73% of my data will now get moved out based on the policies I set. It's about 18 million files. And these, when you move that data out, it's not only going to free up 198 terabytes of capacity on your storage, but it's going to reduce your backup and DR by 3 times that much. So it actually shows you a significant amount of savings on the backup and the DR. And all these savings, you can actually edit your own cost model. So you can, based on how many backup copies you keep, based on whether you do DR or not, based on the cost for these different things, you can put in your own cost and you get an answer that's customized to your environment. So we told you that 3 of the tips for better data management are, first, you want to understand your data, and this is showing you how you can understand your data. Second, you want to understand what data is important and what is not. And again, this analysis helps you understand the hot and cold data and helps you define different policies, maybe based on departments or groups, and how much data is cold, on what you want archived, what you want replicated to a cheaper location, etc. And third, we said it's important for you to understand how to fit this within your budget, and the cost calculator here actually helps you understand that. And once you've done all of this, if you want to get approval on the project program management, all you need to do is generate a report from this or come into this console, and it can actually show you how these savings can be achieved. So now, hopefully, you've gotten a sense of how you can do tips 1, 2, and 3 in our Smarter Data Management 5 tips. And I'm going to actually hand this back to Jon to talk about the 4th tip of understanding your options.
Great. Thank you very much, Krishna. And let's see, I'll get onto that next slide here. So understanding your options, I think this is the next part of this is really exciting. Because not only do you have a way to move the data, which is smart and gives you information every step of the way, and keeps it transparent to your users, which of course is super critical, is making sure that your user behavior is not disrupted. The other thing that makes this really exciting is the back end, because the kind of the other new piece of new news here is there is an infrastructure on the back end which is fundamentally different and better suited for this kind of data movement. There's a back end which is fundamentally better suited than traditional storage options. So you may think of disk and tape as being your only options, NAS or tape. The reality is you have another option on-prem, which is S3 compatible storage, and this is a relative newcomer on the landscape compared to SAN and NAS, but in fact is becoming something increasingly prevalent in the enterprise. And in fact, of course, if you've studied cloud infrastructure, you know that S3 compatible object storage is the building block of hyperscale cloud. So all the major cloud providers are built on this class of storage. The reason why they use it is exactly the same reason why it's interesting for this use case, and that is that it's a very simple, modular, and very cost-effective way of managing data exactly like this. It's for data that needs to grow within a single namespace in a way which is very easy to manage. In other words, it doesn't grow through individual silos. It actually grows in a single namespace that can grow as large as you want, up to an exabyte. So scalability is great. That means you can add capacity as you need it, but of course that alone wouldn't solve the problem of cost if in fact the underlying infrastructure weren't itself very cost effective, but it is. The underlying infrastructure is about 70% less expensive than traditional SAN or NAS, which is where migrating data to this starts making a lot of sense. And it's significantly less expensive than public cloud as well. So it provides an option for managing this big pool of data, but keeping all that data within a single namespace, a single infrastructure where it's easily managed, it's easily searched, and it doesn't take a lot of management bandwidth on your part to realize these savings. So this is, in fact, why the major cloud providers build on this type of storage, is for exactly those reasons, simple management, and you can benefit from those same things in your infrastructure as well. People say, well, I'm familiar with traditional NAS, SAN. How does this fit in? How does this compare? Well, traditional NAS and SAN were designed for performance. I mean, matter of fact, those architectures have really gone over to flash in terms of their underlying storage infrastructure, which is great. That gives you very high IOPS, gives you fast access time, terrific for data where performance is at a premium. But we're talking about a different kind of data here, where really it's capacity, manageability, and simplicity that are at a premium. And that's where 80% of your data really should reside. 20% of the performance sensitive absolutely belongs in your traditional NAS SAN environment. But for the 80% that's not performance sensitive, if you're keeping those on NAS and SAN, you're spending too much money. And that's exactly what this whole solution is about, is moving that capacity data to something which scales easily and costs less money. What's exciting about this infrastructure versus those traditional ones is it grows with your needs. So you can start small, a small number of nodes, and then expand on demand. So we can actually start as small as 100 terabytes of usable capacity and then grow organically without disruption, without downtime, without having to move data around. There's no migration required. There's no remapping of users. It simply grows within a single namespace. It's a fully clustered peer-to-peer environment. So every node, or every server, if you prefer to think of it like that, every node is equal. They all have processing power, they all have storage, and they all collaborate. Every one of them can respond to requests, so performance grows as well as you add capacity. And Cloudian offers nodes or servers that start as small as 96 terabytes and go up to as much as we just announced yesterday, our new Seagate and Cloudian HyperStore Extreme that's actually 1.5 petabytes in a 4U high package. So we actually go now from 96 terabytes to 1.5 petabytes in a single solution. All of them very, very cost-effective, cost down under 0.5 cent per gigabyte per month. So if you think about public cloud, typically costs around 2.5 cents per gigabyte per month with any kind of access charges included. This is under 0.5. It can go as low as 0.5 cent per gigabyte per month in this solution. So you can see where massive savings come in. So why would you do this? Well, really, we talked about how it's ideal for capacity data because of the scalability and the cost. It's also ideal for this kind of solution because it's fast. Although it's not as fast as your NAS or SAN, it is 100 times faster than tape because it is all HDD disk-based storage. So you have instant access to the data. We're talking latencies here in the 100 millisecond kind of range, as opposed to latencies on tape, which could easily be a minute. And you have search integrated. So there's user-defined metadata stored along with your information. And you have Google-like search tools. We use Elasticsearch to search that metadata so you can find and retrieve the information you want. The other thing that's exciting about this is, as Krishna said, this really cuts your backup costs because this is performing a backup-like function by moving the data off to Cloudian, where the data is protected across multiple nodes. In fact, if you need to have off-site storage as part of your infrastructure, that's easily accommodated as well because we're cloud compatible. So cloud compatibility across AWS, Microsoft, and Azure is built in, and you can go out to the most cost-effective cloud tier, because the idea is, of course, that's for DR. So you don't have to put it on an expensive tier that's readily accessed. You can put it out on a Glacier or the other Amazon Deep Archive options, which cost significantly less, because the expectation is you're only going to access that if something goes seriously wrong. So cloud compatibility is a way of achieving DR at a very, very low cost. And of course, that is a cloud solution that's only accessed from Cloudian. That's strictly a DR that's locked off to every other access. All the other data is behind your firewall, on-prem, under your control. So you have complete control over where all these resources are going. And if you are connecting the cloud for DR, we've got that covered too with extra security layers that protect the data in the cloud as well. So these are all, really interesting reasons to think about this class of storage, S3 compatible object storage for managing this data. So with that, I will turn it back over to Krishna to close us out here.
Perfect. Thanks, John. As John mentioned, there's a pretty significant difference with using something like a Cloudian to manage your cold data and from the old ways of archiving. And that big difference is that data that you're moving to something like Cloudian is actually fully accessible. So in the olden days, the concept of archiving was you move data off your primary storage, typically to something like tape, and then the data might take a very long time for you to recover. And so it's really out of sight, and it's really not accessible by users. And there is a significant performance degradation and latency to even get at that data. But with Cloudian and Komprise, we're changing that equation significantly. Essentially what we're saying is take your cold data out of active management, move it to a cost-efficient object store, which is Cloudian, and Komprise makes that move fully transparent so the data looks like it's still files on your original flash or any NAS server that you had. So for your users, the moved data, the data that's sitting as objects at a low cost on Cloudian, looks like it's still files on your original NAS. And for users and applications, there is really no disruption to their experience. They continue to open data or files exactly as they did before. There may be a slightly longer latency, but other than that, if the data is accessible, it's fully searchable from the original namespace, so they can search and find files that are sitting as objects on Cloudian, and all the access control, all the permissions, all the metadata on those files is fully preserved exactly as original. So this is actually showing you when Komprise archives the cold data from a SMB share, and so we're showing you a Windows file server view here. The left is the before, the right is the after, and we put those red rectangles around the files that we have moved just to show you what they look like. So the moved data looks like the original files. It can have an indirection on it if you want to, just so you know which ones are local and which ones are remote. But other than that, the access to the data is exactly the same as before. So there is really no disruption to users or applications. They don't have to learn object storage. They don't have to go look for their data somewhere else. They don't have to come to IT to ask for archived data. Everything is available to them exactly as before. And we do this, Komprise does this move without putting any agents on your storage, without using any stub files, and without getting in front of the hot data or metadata paths. And the reason that's important is because 99.9% of access is to hot data. So most of the time, your users are actually opening the active data, not the cold data, because the cold data hasn't been touched in a year or more, so they're really less likely to open it. So 99.9% of the time, the data that they're accessing is being served by your high-performance flash or your high-performance NAS environment, and neither Cloudian nor Komprise are in that picture. So there's no degradation to performance of hot data. So only when they go to access a cold file that has been archived, only then does Komprise come in the picture, and it translates that file request into the object and brings back the file and returns it. So only then do Cloudian and Komprise come in the picture, only for access of cold data. And so this is a really simple way to do transparent archiving or tiering. And the other thing that we do when we move the data to Cloudian is we preserve native access to the data. So when we move data from your NAS into Cloudian, you have the option of keeping a file as one object. And the reason that native access is important is because, as John said, not only is Cloudian a cost-efficient object store, but it has its own capabilities where you could do analytics on Cloudian. You could run new applications directly on Cloudian. And if you want to do that, it's really important that the data sitting on Cloudian isn't munched up in some way, and you can fully access it. And Komprise preserves that native access. So when Komprise moves data, it's not just tearing blocks of data into Cloudian. It's not corrupting that data in any way where it's putting it in a proprietary format. It's actually preserving native access to the object, and it's preserving file access to the data. So it's doing both. And that's why we're able to provide data access anywhere from any of these environments. And this is important for our fifth tip. If you remember the tips, we said, hey, one of the things that you need to be able to do when you move data is you want to be able to evolve your architecture. Because as Jon mentioned, the ideal architecture you want to eventually get to is 20% of your data, the hot data, is sitting on a performance storage and is being actively managed with backups and DR, and 80% of your data is sitting on capacity storage, and you can still extract value from that 80% of your data. And that's why data access anywhere is really important. So we walked through our 5 tips, and I can tell you that we have several that are actually using this as a more intelligent and smarter way to manage data. And I'm going to highlight 2 of those customers. One is a global real estate firm that has offices worldwide. And the challenge they were running into is that they were growing very rapidly through acquisitions. They were acquiring more real estate companies. And as they were acquiring these companies, they realized that very quickly their data was in the petabyte range. And the problem they had is that backing up all that data was taking too long. So they had a backup SLA of like 4 weeks, and the backups were taking 5 to 6 months because there was so much data. There were billions of files. So they wanted to modernize their backup, and they realized that the only way to reduce the backup cost and the backup windows is to offload the cold data from that active backup. So they brought in Komprise and Cloudian, and actually, Komprise analyzed the data, moved the cold data to Cloudian, and doing that, they were able to shrink the active management down to about 25% of their data. And actually, on that 25%, they bought Rubrik to back it up because now they were able to afford Rubrik on the smaller subset of data, and the backups ran faster. A second use case is a research university right here in the U.S. On the East Coast, it's a major research university, again, had petabytes of data, but the challenge they had is data had accumulated over decades. And this being research data, they couldn't get rid of it. They needed it. And all that legacy data, though, was consuming expensive primary storage. And they didn't want to use NetApp Fabric pools or ENC Cloud pools to cure the data because their researchers did want to write object-based applications down the road, and so they didn't want to just move blocks of data to an object store. So they, again, they bought Cloudian and Komprise. Komprise found the cold data, moved it transparently to the Cloudian HyperStore, and they're able to leverage the data on Cloudian. So these are 2 examples. And I'll hand it back to Jon to wrap up and take questions.
Terrific. Okay, thanks, Krishna. So just to summarize, I think what we've talked about here is super important to managing the problem we identified right up front, which is data growth. And as Krishna said, 20% of that data really belongs in that fast environment, 80% runs in both. But you need to understand your environment, right? So a first part of this is understanding, what your scenario is specifically, and we can accomplish that with an audit. So it's something very easy to do, as Krishna said, to go in and look at this information using the tools that Komprise has. And then within that audit, knowing which of that data is important, where that time-sensitive information is, and what is that, 60 or 80% that can be moved off to something that's less performant without impacting your user experience one bit, because that's really important. You have to maintain your user experience and keep them completely whole in what they're seeing and doing in their daily workflow. And then understand your budget, because there's significant savings to be had here. We can identify exactly within your budget where those savings can be achieved, both from a hardware perspective and also from a backup license perspective. There are multiple parameters that we can look at to save you money and help you get better ROI. And then finally, know all your options. There's obviously multiple different ways we can go here. Lots of knobs to twist in the Komprise solution, and on the back end of Cloudian, you've got a storage environment that can be used for a variety of use cases. Not only the Komprise use case, but also that same storage pool can then be applied to other types of problems as well, such as managing large archive files, acting as a backup target from other environments, that, say, backing up your SAN environment, for example. Cloudian is a perfect target for that. So you've got multiple options on how that environment is used as well. And then finally, pick something that can grow with you. Your environment will continue to grow. That's how we got here to start with. It's not going to stop. So you need to make sure you have something that is going to continue to scale with time. And that's really what object storage is all about, is providing that scalable storage environment. That's why the cloud providers build on object storage. And that's what Komprise helps you do as well, because now your NAS environment becomes more manageable. By moving data to the Cloudian environment, you make your NAS environment that much easier to manage as it grows. So really, these 5 things provide a comprehensive solution for data growth.
Perfect. Thanks both Krishna and John. Cloudian.com or Komprise.com for more info. Thank you again for joining us, and this concludes our webinar.